I'm talking with the fantastic violinist Randall Goosby, who's joined me by Zoom. We're going to talk about this new album. It's called Roots, right here. I've got it right here. Wonderful performance, by the way. Thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, we've spoken before, right? When you were in Toledo, and I think it was a year ago, you had just signed, or you were about to sign with Decca Classics. You were going to do your debut album. You kept all of that a complete secret from me when we spoke last time. So, kudos to you on that. I guess a lot has happened over the last year since we spoke with you last. What are some of the highlights for you, aside from the album? We're going to talk about that in a second, but what have you been up to?
Well, quite a lot. I had a couple of really exciting performances. I actually just finished a 2-week tour of the UK, sort of celebrating the album, and I gave some recitals, performing album repertoire, and I actually also performed the same concerto I performed with the Toledo Symphony, the 9th concerto by Joseph Bologna with the London Philharmonic. Following that, I gave my very first performance of the Brahms concerto with the Pasadena Symphony. And also at the end of the summer, before the tour, I gave my debut with the LA Phil at the Hollywood Bowl. So a lot of exciting performances and more to come.
You've been staying busy, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Last time that we spoke a lot about the Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who's not on this disc, and I assume it's because of the instrumentation. There's not a lot of chamber stuff by the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. But you had some very strong opinions about this whole idea of the heritage of Black composers and Black musicians as well. A lot of it is crystallized on the repertoire that you have in this CD, and obviously the title Roots kind of harkens to that idea as well. Can you tell us, give us some more information on the background of this recording and your desire to share this music?
Absolutely. Well, the genesis of this whole relationship with Decca and the album and everything was sort of a perfect storm. It happened, the signing, they approached me about signing at the end of the summer 2020 during the height of both COVID and also the Black Lives Matter movement. I was one of hundreds of thousands of musicians around the world who were paying, their tributes with virtual performances on Facebook and YouTube and all that stuff. And it was really amazing to see all that support. But, there came a time when I got tired of seeing that stuff, certainly got tired of doing it myself because I wasn't really sure what impact I was having on the situation. I wasn't sure that I was actually affecting any change or inspiring any change. And I really wanted to do something that, first of all, was meaningful and felt authentic to me, but that also, made a little bit more of a meaningful and longstanding impact on the culture of classical music and the movement and all of that stuff. So when Decca approached me about signing, I was pretty much at my wit's end at that point, and that was just the springboard for me to take off with this album. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't know how I was going to be able to do it. So Decca came in at the perfect time. And, a few of the pieces on the album I've had in my back pocket for 10 years or something like that. I mean, the Perkinson and the Grant Still, they've been with me for a while. But, it was a great opportunity for me to make some discoveries as well. Florence Price, I had known about, her more famous compositions, orchestral works and piano concerti and stuff. But, these little programmatic gems for violin and piano were really exciting discoveries. As was the brand new commission by my good friend, Xavier Foley, Shelter Island for double bass and violin. So, it was a great opportunity for me to explore and celebrate, where I came from and where American classical music and really, all American popular music came from. I like to think that blues and jazz and the spiritual and all of this music, really had a heavy hand in influencing, there's a really strong trickle-down effect, I think, throughout history and across genres. And I wanted to really highlight, the importance of the role of Black music, art, and culture in our society and culture today.
Well, obviously, Black culture is so much a part of, American culture.
Absolutely.
And in the classical music world, speaking as a radio presenter, thank you for this. Thank you for this recording. Thank you for this repertoire. You know, we need as much as we can get as far as these composers goes, and as far as bringing it into the future, not only for the composers, but also for the performers, such as yourself. What was your introduction to some of these composers like Florence Price and Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson and other composers that you have on this recording?
Well, Florence Price, I was introduced just by my own curiosity. I mean, I a few years ago sort of went down a Google rabbit hole and found recordings of her symphonic works, as I mentioned, more large scale compositions. Had a chance to do a little reading up on her life and story, and her studies at the New England Conservatory, and how she was able to sort of fuse that with her own personal roots and background in the spiritual and in church hymns and things like that with her family. And it was just so great to see how that really came through in such a convincing way with the fantasies, especially. The Grant Still, like I said, has been with me for a long time. I think I first performed the piece arranged for violin and string orchestra. I think it was with the Albany Symphony in Georgia. It was must have been over 10 years ago. I was just on the cusp of teenage.
You were like 3 years old 10 years ago. So,
yeah, just about. And so that introduction was made a long time ago, as with the Perkinson. My first time with the Perkinson was again, I think I was like 13. And it was following my win at the junior division of the 2010 Sphinx Competition, and I was asked to perform the last movement, Jet and Blues, at Sphinx's annual Carnegie Hall celebration concert with the Sphinx Virtuosi. And that was the first time that I met Sanford Allen as well, the dedicatee of that work, and who had a chance to work on this music again ahead of the album. So
well, we should mention Sanford Allen, a fantastic violinist, the first Black member of the New York Phil, among other things, real legend as far as violinists go. It's amazing that you had his influence, his mentorship in creating this album. You've had some pretty impressive mentors out there, like Itzhak Perlman, for one. And we talked about that a little bit a year ago, but I guess there's a connection between you're working with Perlman and also with Xavier Foley, the young composer that plays on this disc as well.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, and tell us about Xavier and his music.
Absolutely. Well, Xavier and I met at Mr. Perlman's summer music school, the Perlman Music Program, in 2011, which was the first year that I participated. I've since been back every summer for that same program, as well as the chamber music workshop for older musicians. But Xavier and I met then, and even back then, in our early years, I was absolutely blown away by this guy's technique and his just ability on the bass. I mean, I've never seen anyone play the bass like he did. He could probably play Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto on double bass if he really wanted to. He's got it like that. But, it wasn't until, years later that I started to see and hear his own compositions. And, he's written a lot of really incredible stuff for double bass. For any of you listening, if you want to check him out on Instagram, he posts video recordings of all of his compositions, and they're so impressive. But after 10 years or so of knowing each other, we had never collaborated, and I missed out on a chance to perform his double concerto for violin and double bass with the Sphinx Virtuosi a few years ago. And so when I had the opportunity to program this album, obviously looking at the history of Black composers and sort of where we've come from, only a little slice of it, I might add, I thought it was really important to add a little piece of where we are now. And also hopefully a window into sort of where we go into the future. So Xavier was the first person who popped into my mind, and he just has such a unique compositional style and voice, and draws influence, as did many of the composers on the album, from a lot of different places. And I think that there are a lot of parallels between his music and even some of the works that we see on the album as well. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity, and I just wanted to be able to share his very unique voice as part of this project as well.
Yeah, the track is called Shelter Island. There's a great video of the two of you actually playing against each other on Shelter Island that folks can find on your website. Right. I really, really want to hear the Tchaikovsky Concerto on double bass now. That's definitely gotta go up there somewhere. But I do want to mention, it's interesting that you put Xavier Foley's piece first on the recording, and everything else sort of flows from that. It puts things in a slightly different context, a slightly different light when you're listening to it sequentially. It's a really well constructed album. You also have some world premieres on here, the Florence Price, obviously, that you mentioned, but that's a composer that has started to have a real renaissance over the past few years because a lot of her music was undiscovered before that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. A lot of her music was undiscovered until I think it was 2009, when a former summer home of hers outside of Chicago was abandoned and was set to be demolished. But the contractors decided to take a look around inside and just happened upon hundreds of pages of music and journal entries and all that kind of thing. So, very thankful that we do have this music, although it's not quite as accessible as it should be still. Without the help of Decca, I may have had a little bit more trouble finding this music. A lot of it is still held at the archives of the University of Arkansas. Her hometown is in Little Rock. So a lot of the music resides there. Not all of it is in publication. So, I'm only hoping that with this renaissance of her music and discoveries of more of it, that the actual publication of her music becomes more in demand and people, have a little bit more easy access to it. So yeah, very, very excited about these premieres and just about all the attention that she's been gaining. It's really wonderful to see.
Well, I know that we don't have a lot of time, but you do have a couple of other composers on here who are not Black composers, like George Gershwin, Antonin Dvorak, but there's a connection, obviously. With the Gershwin, you've got the Heifetz arrangements from Porgy and Bess. There's that violin connection there, and obviously the subject matter of the opera itself, but also the Dvorak. Can you tell us a little bit about the connection these white composers have with the Black culture?
Absolutely. I mean, very simply, I wanted to highlight the role that Black composers have played in more traditional classical music. There are connections and inspirations like this throughout history that even I'm probably not aware of at this point. I've got a lot of research to do. I'm certainly not claiming to be an expert on the subject, but obviously Gershwin was directly inspired by Black music and culture with Porgy and Bess, and kind of broke down a lot of barriers, I think, certainly for the times. And Dvorak, I mean, there's the famous quote during his tenure here in the US where, he credits the future of American classical music to the Negro spiritual and also to Native American folk melodies. And he was the first that I know of to really make that sort of a statement with conviction, and probably caught a lot of flack for it at the time. So I just wanted to highlight some of those influences, and just to say that, this notion that that Black classical composers sort of exist in their own little sphere and haven't really seeped into the more traditional classical canon the way they have to more popular music. It's just not true. They've been around and the influence has been there, but for reasons that should be really obvious by this point, they just haven't gotten the recognition and the credit that they deserve. So I wanted to highlight that as well. Not to mention that the Dvorak was another work that Perlman introduced me to. And of course, as you mentioned, with the violin connection with one of my heroes on the violin, Jascha Heifetz, I just thought it fit well. So that was, to keep it simple, the motivation behind those additions.
Yeah, it's great. The album is called Roots, from violinist Randall Goosby, on Decca Classics. You can find all kinds of information online about this, videos, as well as excerpts from the recording itself. Randall, great to talk with you again. Thank you for spending some time. See, my phone won't leave us alone here. I got to figure out how to turn that off next time. But I'll get to the phone. You'll get to your activities, as I'm sure. And thanks for joining us here on FM 91.
Thanks very much for having me, Brad.